Good evening and welcome to tonight's meeting of the Commonwealth Club of California, the place where you're in the know. I'm Emiko Ono, Program Director for the Performing Arts at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. We're delighted to be able to support tonight's program. The title of our panel conversation tonight is High Performance, the State of the Arts Sector in the Fast-Changing Bay Area. As many of you know, the Hewlett Foundation has supported the performing arts in the Bay Area for more than 50 years. We've seen immense changes over that long history. But what we're seeing today is that the Bay Area arts community is really at an inflection point, facing accelerating changes on a host of fronts. Technology is driving new ways for artists to create and audiences to experience and participate in the arts. Demographic shifts are posing challenges for many long-standing arts institutions trying to engage new audiences. Securing space for performances and artists in the Bay Area's white-hot real estate market is testing the sector's resourcefulness like never before. Amidst all this change, the funding landscape is shifting too. Longtime arts funders are leaving the field, and also new ways of generating and resourcing the arts are beginning to show great promise. Tonight's conversation will focus on the current state of the arts in the San Francisco Bay Area and where we go next. We have arts experts from across the region and the country to lead this discussion. And following the panel discussion, we'll be announcing the recipients of this year's Hewlett 50 Arts Commissions. These commissions, which we launched last year to celebrate the Hewlett Foundation's 50th anniversary, support the creation of exceptional new works in the performing arts. They're developed through a collaboration between local nonprofit organizations and world-class artists. I hope you'll stick around for the announcement and join us in the recipients of the commissioning awards at a reception following the program. It's now my pleasure to introduce today's panelists. Rafael Casal is a Bay Area native. He's a writer, performer, and producer, best known for his debut film, Blindspotting. His theater and verse works have been presented at venues across the country and featured on MTV, Showtime, HBO's Def Poetry, and South by Southwest and the Sundance Film Festival. And, spoiler alert, he's one of the recipients of this year's Hewlett 50 Arts Commissions. Marcus Anthony Shelby is a bassist, composer, arranger, band leader, and educator who lives in San Francisco. His work and music focuses on African American lives, social music movements, and music education. Marcus is an artist in residence with the Yerba Buena Gardens Festival and will serve as a resident artistic director for SF Jazz in 2019. He's also served on the San Francisco Arts Commission since 2013. Nina Simon is executive director of the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History. She's also the founder of its global initiative, Of, By, For All, which helps civic and cultural organizations become of, by, and for their communities. She's been called a museum visionary by Smithsonian Magazine and previously worked as an independent consultant and exhibition designer with over 100 museums and cultural centers around the world. Finally, our moderator today is also a highly respected member of the arts world. Susan Medak is managing director of Berkeley Rep, a job she's held for nearly 3 decades. Susie previously served as president of the League of Resident Theaters and treasurer of Theater Communication Group, organizations that represent the interests of nonprofit theaters across the nation. She serves on the faculty of Yale School of Drama and is a member of the International Women's Forum. And closer to home, she's the founding chair of the Berkeley Arts and Education Steering Committee for the Berkeley Unified School District. Please welcome our panelists as I turn over the program to Susie.
So I wasn't going to do this, but I'm going to do it. So I have been watching Nina turn into this amazing person over actually longer than the 7 years when we were in Michigan together.
Yeah.
But it's been just so. I was saying to her, she hasn't changed at all in all of these years, and she's got so much more weight on her shoulders. So it's just so much fun to see you, Marcus. It is so much fun to see him, and we just realized that 5 years ago we worked together. I didn't realize it was that long when Marcus was part of our Anna Devere Smith project about the school to prison pipeline at Berkeley Rep. And I have to say, the coolest thing for me, this is my takeaway from tonight, if nothing else happens this evening, to discover that Raphael actually was in our summer middle school intensive program at Berkeley Rep 90,000 years ago.
And that's how old I am. Skin cream, people.
So cool. I'm such a fan. So, when I was thinking, so that's it, it's done. I'm done, it's over. Okay, now you can talk. I was thinking about what we wanted to accomplish today, and I was thinking about this idea of high performance. And I was thinking about every conversation that I've had with artists and people in the arts in the last few years, and nobody talks about high performance. What everybody is talking about is high anxiety. And listening to Emiko's sort of list of the changes in the environment, which is really just the tip of the iceberg, really made me think that we had the opportunity to share to share some of the conversation that people in the arts are having with each other, but to also try to expand what we think the conversation might be among those of you who are arts lovers, both here in the Bay Area and beyond. One of the things that I've noticed over the years is that while we are having conversations in the Bay Area and everybody's rolling their eyes over it, we can pretty much guarantee that somewhere else in the country in 6 months to 6 years is going to be having the same conversation. So and I know that's so obnoxious to say, but it's true. And so even though what we're going to be talking about today is very much what's going on in the Bay Area, I think if we do this right, it's a conversation that actually will have impact beyond that. The other thing that I just want to put on the table before we jump into a real conversation is that we've got a group of people up here who I think in many ways we're coming from some of the same places in terms of how we're thinking about what's going on in the field today. There's a number of people who aren't in the room who are also having conversations. And for those of you who are here, you may have noticed that today the Symphony announced that Esapeka is going to be joining us to replace Michael Tilson Thomas. We've got new leadership in our fine arts museums. We've got new leadership in our major theaters. There's a massive sea change that's happening. And the nature of that conversation overlaps with this, but it also in some ways is very different. And so those of you who enjoy all of it just have to think about how do you integrate what you're hearing today with the different kinds of organizations and artists with whom you're involved through the sort of everyday cultural life that you participate in. That said, we thought that we'd start with a question that might just sort of lay the framework for every other conversation that we have today, or the rest of the conversation today, and that's that each of these folks was asked to just give some thought to what you think of as what constitutes art. What is the definition? We don't all agree, and And what you see as being the purpose of art, and whether you actually think art has to have a purpose. And you promised me that I wouldn't have to call out any of you.
We'll let Raphael go first.
No, I'm very thirsty.
Go ahead, Marcus. Go wild.
Well, I'm very honored to be here and to be on this panel. I came to San Francisco about 22 years ago from Los Angeles. And one of the reasons why I came here is for the very things that exist here. The institutional support that exists here from the East Bay to San Francisco to the South Bay down to Santa Cruz and north. I think one of the things that I can comment on that question has been really to inspire, the best teachers that I've had haven't been the teachers in art who have told me how to play the bass or showed me how to play the bass, but have inspired me to find my own language and to practice and to find a purpose. And I think, we might have three different answers to what is art. It's like, what is jazz? don't think anybody can answer what is jazz.
I was counting on you.
I can't answer that, you know, but I can. I think for me, what the importance of what art has been a method of informing, of inspiring, of lifting, supporting, educating, teaching. Those are the things that I've found in art that have had a meaning to me, from working with the youngest of the young, 2-year-olds, 1-year-olds in preschools, up into a collegiate level, and finding those connections that can inspire a young child or an older person, and to reach their potential, to look at the world around them and find creative ways to find solutions, to heal some of the problems through inspiring different ways, whether it is messaging. A lot of the music I do is inspired by or influenced by black music that came out of the civil rights movement, or black music that came out of the anti-slavery movement. And this is all built on messaging, uplifting messages, spirituals, work songs, freedom songs. To me, that's the highest form of art, you know, because it was that music that helped free a people from, you know, the most heinous crimes of humanity that happened here in the United States through slavery. So the spirituals might be one of the highest art forms that I can name, and so it encompasses all of that: teaching, educating, uplifting. It's communal, it's individual, it's improvisational. It involves the blues in essence. And so that to me, again, we might have 3 different answers.
Yeah.
But there's a purpose there. There's education. There's uplift. You know, there's all those different things.
Thank you. You're going to have to do it, Raphael.
Same.
Okay, we can leave
I
now.
want that answer. I think the closest I can come to answering that question is I'll source somebody else. James Baldwin has this great quote where he says, "The role of the artist is that of the role of the lover. If I love you, I have to make you conscious of the things you don't see." I think that's my qualification for art. I tattooed it across my chest. It was a very important day, the day that I read that, and I think that's as close as I've ever come to defining anything through another artist's art. That's how I found that definition.
I often think about art as opening a side door into something that's vulnerable, that's human, that connects us to each other, into something real. You know, we're working right now at our museum on a project with artists and with elderly people in our community who are experiencing social isolation. And I was in this community meeting recently, and there was this performance and installation artist who was sitting down with some people in their 80s and asking, we're going to create this scene and this performative experience to invite visitors into really empathizing and connecting with what loneliness feels like for you. And what are some of the objects that feel that way, that tell that story for you? And people talked about things like, they said, it's my address book full of names crossed out because people have died. It's the dog leash for the dog that I'm no longer able to care for. It's the keys to the car that I can't drive anymore. It's that damn phone that doesn't ring and doesn't do the job I want it to do in connecting me to the people I love. And I think about when we work with artists around social issues, like social isolation, like foster care, like homelessness, we're never, I believe, going to solve the problems at the front door. I don't think art is going to end homelessness or end social isolation. But I think it's going to open a window or a side door into a deeper, more vulnerable conversation about how we want to address these issues facing the Bay Area, facing all of us today, and how we want to get past the noise and the trauma and the stress at the front door to get into something real so that we can talk about where we want to take our communities and how we want to imagine where we can go. You know, you talked about inspiration and running a museum of history and art. We always like to say history helps us understand where we came from. Art helps us imagine where we can go. And I hear you talking about spirituals is beautiful. This idea of being rooted in your history and the people behind you makes us strong to then imagine how we could open new doors to a different kind of future together.
I would even, hearing you speak on this is like, it also asks the question, who's the artist? And sort of tearing down the pretentiousness on who is the artist and who can create art and who can be ordained to be called this, And I think just simple, we all have the capacity to create. We've been given that capacity, just being human. We can create. Now, what we create and how we create and whether that's building up or tearing down is another question. But I know when I personally go into prisons and work with people who have never created something maybe formal, but have the capacity to create and have the capacity to think about building up as opposed to tearing down, then the definition of artists becomes more inclusive. And if we lived in a world where everybody saw themselves as an artist, I really believe we might be in a world that would see much more beauty as opposed to destruction. And, as opposed to like, these are artists over here, and these are not artists because they didn't go to school or they didn't get the training or whatever the case. My favorite musicians are musicians who never went to school. Louis Armstrong, people like that who had the capacity to create, like Louis Armstrong, who started off in the Colored Waifs home.
And Marcus, I think about what you're saying, think about what the three of you said, and I would think about, we'd all thought a little bit about how we felt about this beforehand, but I was realizing I sit somewhere in between all of you, in the sense that I think of art as being an external manifestation of something that you absolutely have to externalize. You have to externalize whatever is your internal impulse. And that for some people, the need to communicate with that is so profound and so deep, and for other people, it's simply the manifestation of it that is the thing that's absolutely essential. And the thing that feels different about this moment in time to me is that we're making room for a much broader definition of what is the purpose of art, of what is what's the essential ask of art? Is there an essential ask of art? And the obligation of people making art that really is different, I think, than a moment before. But so given that we've all got our different nuanced responses to all of this, we're also experiencing the Bay Area as people of the arts in a very particular way. And I'm sort of curious to know whether you are feeling that this is a period of great vibrancy because there's sort of fewer strictures, or whether the limitations of the moment are creating more of a sense of break. So is this a period of vibrancy, or is this a period of pulling back?
I think Raphael has proven that it's a period of vibrancy with the release of his film.
Well, and
So
I-
I'm gonna leave that on his
Yeah.
work.
Sure. Hello. Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated question, right? So much of my career has been about leaving the Bay to come back here and do work. That's the great frustration of the ceiling of some of the art scenes that I've been a part of, whether it was music or theater or trying to get into film. I mean, all the press that we got around our films were about this renaissance happening in the Bay Area about film. It was 3 films. Does 3 a renaissance make? I don't know.
Well,
I don't know.
It's
These are
3
the
more
riddles
than
of
there
the universe.
It's 3 more than there were.
But I think what it meant is that it felt like suddenly there was this explosion. I think in the same way that sometimes we talk about artists who develop, they seem like they're overnight sensations, and you look at their work and you go, oh, they've been around for 15 years.
Yeah.
So does the Bay Area's art scene. You look at it and people have been trying to, Boots Riley is no new filmmaker. If you know Boots Riley, you know that he's been directing music videos and directing shorts for a long time. You know that he's been an oral storyteller for the totality of his career, and thus is true for all the other films that have been going on. It's not, if you know Ryan Coogler didn't just make Black Panther.
It came out of something? It came out of something?
There were, there's this whole other, there's all this time, but also he went to USC to nurture his talents and shot things in other places, and so I think there's this there's this middle sort of period of artistic trajectories that is really hard to crack in the Bay Area, where people sort of display an exceptional amount of talent and drive, and we can accommodate it in here, but we can sort of accommodate sort of the beginnings of the victory lap, or the next level, where you've reached a national level of attention, and now we can give you a home here. And so I think for me, the difficult place to start crafting for newly exceptional artists that are showing great promise and talent is figuring out what to do with them once they've had their first big win, and how to get them to the point where they don't have to go to New York or to LA or to Chicago to sort out that middle period and then have to try to come home a hero.
But so what's the thing that's happening in New York, Chicago, LA that makes it possible for those mid-career people to be successful, and that's not happening here?
I'm not sure.
Artists leave Santa Cruz, they come to the Bay, right? Because they say, and then that's more about small market, big market. I mean, I guess I wonder about, you talked about anxiety in your entry point, Susie, and I heard in what you were saying, Marcus, this whole balancing of, is there scarcity in who gets to be an artist, who has the means to be supported, or is there abundance in the creativity and the ability to express? And I think especially in the Bay Area, there's a little bit of a hypocrisy of the tech sector is selling a story of abundance culturally writ large, and yet, as you know, you're talking about, artists are hitting a moment and a ceiling of saying, wait a second, I was told I could be creative and expressive and that this is a Bay Area and a region that's about expression, but my ability to pursue that to my greatest fulfillment is hitting a ceiling here. And is that about me? Is that about the region? Is that about the opportunities? And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people end up opting out because they don't have that opportunity to get to that next place where they can then cycle back.
So we hear a couple different things among the people we're dealing with, me,
Yeah.
they, we, the royal we, which, we all know that housing and real estate is just a massive problem for any artist, whether it's a studio, whether it's a showcase space, or whether it's
Place to
where you
rehearse
live.
your big band.
Yeah, right. So we know that real estate is an issue. Everybody, we all love to say it's always about funding, and I think maybe there is. I would say that is a reality, but is it also something about hometown spirit, and that we love our early career artists and we love our mature artists, but that they need to be validated elsewhere in order for them to be welcomed home?
Well, I think one of the good things about this Bay Area are the institutions that support artists, whether it's, I could speak very proudly about Yerba Buena Gardens Festival, YBCA, Intersection for the Arts, Youth Speaks, places that I know about, but there are many others that have supported the new artists, the mid-career artists, but there's a ceiling to that, and I think a lot of the big studios, television, they are forever in Los Angeles and New York, and so that's where artists may go, whether they're in their mid-career or not, for those opportunities. I'm also very proud and have been part of the Arts Commission for the last 5 years, and the various programs that we have to support mid-career artists, new artists, art organizations through the many different programs that we have, from street artist program to our community investments and arts and grants into the schools, and all these various things. It's really strong.
So you're finding support at different levels.
There's support at all levels, and there's also a focus on cultural equity, which is very important as well. And those of us that live here in the Bay Area, we can be quite proud of these organizations and our art commission here, in particular for the efforts that they have done for many, many decades.
But so just on referencing again the fact that you feel that you've gotten tiered support along the way. One of the things that we were talking about before we started with Raphael and I were that you've been doing this for years and years and years. You've got the same producers who've been working with you for years and years and years. But all of a sudden you've got access. They've got access to resources that can support the projects that you want to do that they couldn't have imagined a few years ago. What's that, what's that about, and where is it coming from?
Well, we had a very unique situation where we met our producers 10 years ago when they wanted to make a film for maybe 200 grand and shoot it on DSLRs when DSLRs were getting really popular. And we tried to make the film 3 or 4 times over with different people attached. Our film actually came about because I drunk texted our producers after Moonlight won the Oscars.
Nice.
Because I was just so happy that La La Land lost. Let's just be honest. Because it marked a shift in what we valued in the medium, and so I was a few glasses of, let's say, wine in. And texted these producers we've been working with for a long time. We picked it up and put it down a bunch of times and said, we have a film that we love as much as these people love Moonlight. And it was sort of like we should have made it and moved on. And they came back and said, we do it right now. If you said you would, we have the funding for it. We just did another film. We could spill some of that over. Will you and David do it? And David, my writing partner who was in the film with me, had just gotten a Tony for Hamilton. His career was taking off, and we felt like, well, this is a great moment to do it. And to really bring funding that was coming from LA and hype that was coming from New York and shoot something here. But that's not lost on me, that a lot of that is what allowed us to do it here. I remember sitting with the film commission or whatever the title is in Oakland and being like, we're going to shoot a movie here, and it was one guy. He was like, okay, great. It's not a panel.
But
It's not 10 people that are like, well, how are you going to do it? He's just like, sounds good. David Diggs, I know that guy. Sounds great. And that's the thing. And so, the films that shot here, and I'm not sure on this, but I'm pretty sure the scene in Black Panther that says it's shot here was shot in Atlanta, and that's no detriment to that production. But what we realized in shooting here is that it's hard. It's
Is it
hard to shoot
because
here.
there aren't the people and there isn't a skill set and there isn't enough volume to be able to support a group of people?
I don't want to come at that because
that
there is a really vibrant filmmaking community here that wants to and is trying to expand. But in watching the way that the tech world came in here, like they came in here putting down money and building buildings and employing people. And the arts sometimes have a little harder time making those kind of firm investments for the long terms. There was an era where the Wayans brothers were going to build a studio here, and it was hard, and they didn't. But you see what Tyler Perry did in Atlanta. Atlanta is where people shoot film now.
Right.
Because they went there and they built studios, the commerce and the producers were aligned with the artists and said, we can just make a thing and do it here. And now Atlanta is suddenly a hub for an industry that it was Atlanta. We remember Atlanta, right?
Yeah.
People weren't like,
Yeah.
Atlanta, let's go shoot our movie there at the studios there. That was a weird sentence not long ago. And I just wonder, like, what is that in the
Yeah.
Bay Area for us if we're like, well, okay, so a few movies got shot here, but what if 20 films shot here a year and TV shows shot
Could we
here?
actually support a
What
whole
happens when those
community of-
filmmakers can buy houses and can
Right.
buy land and support their peers and grandfather people into the industry and not scrape by trying to all buy in for the one commercial that's going to shoot in San Francisco this month?
Right. Yeah. Right. Are you? Yes. No. You're totally right. You're totally right. But so you're saying a few things though. You're saying partially.
Shouldn't have had that Red Bull.
Yeah. Wait a second. You did have that Red Bull, didn't you?
They all saw me
He's
drink it. It was
lying. He's
here.
lying. But if I could just pull out some of the threads of what I think you were talking about there, was that partly. Well, I'll try. But I think somebody said we're going to make this work somewhere else, and we're going to put together the infrastructure that's going to make this an attractive place to do this, just to begin with. And that took a person or people. It took money. And it took an environment. Let's fix that. Atlanta's an inexpensive city in which to make anything that made it. That created the mulch for all of that to happen. Is it possible? Do we think it's still possible for that to happen in the Bay Area?
Not with the cost of living.
Yeah. I mean, that's a real issue.
That poses a real challenge most of the I moved here in '96. It was cheaper, not cheap. It was cheaper. All those musicians that I knew when they're gone. They're, and it's not even like they went to. Some went to the East Bay. Some went other places, but they no longer are living in San Francisco.
Well, San Francisco, it's an old city.
Well, no, it's an expensive city for an artist, a mid-career and
Yeah.
lower. It's a
Yeah.
very so that I think that poses a real challenge on those fronts. High tech can handle it; they do it. They have the capital for it. But industries like jazz, it doesn't really have that infrastructure. Again, I have to be sing the praises for organizations that have tried to stabilize. Like the Arts Commission have worked with arts organization to try to figure out ways to stabilize artists' careers here in the city.
And the Artist Stabilization Trust here. I mean, looking also at the real estate and protecting that. I mean, art needs space. It needs slack. It needs basements. It needs places you can be loud and not get the cops called on you. I mean, I think there's a lot of ways that the real estate compression is such a big impact just on having the space to play and explore and be able to say, oh, let's rent that storefront for a little while and throw up this screwy installation and see what happens. I think that that's really challenging here.
There's a reason that so many young artists are moving to Detroit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because there's land,
room to grow.
there's room to grow, and it's sort of unrestricted. And I think that part of what we have to figure out, if we're going to be able to preserve a multi-generational cultural scene, is to figure out, it's not just, we love to talk about housing, but I think when we just talk about housing, we're really limiting what the problem is, because as you say, artists make, they perform, they showcase, and there's got to be spaces for all of that. And those are often spaces that aren't really functional for other, you can't be in an office building to do those things.
But I would also turn it around, I mean, from my kind of institutional hat and say there's also a big change in how people want to consume and engage with art. And frankly, the Bay Area is lucky to have a lot of legacy institutions, but those institutions are not necessarily welcoming the diversity of the Bay Area into them as participants, as co-creators, as donors, as artists. And I know a lot of artists who opt out of traditional institutions. They see them as having legacies of oppression, of whiteness, they see that they can get paid better to make art, to do a mural in a tech company, and maybe even more people will see it. And I think that I'm seeing a lot of artists explore new entrepreneurial avenues and kind of feel like some of the institutions, institutions like a museum, are no longer relevant to the way they want to produce and the way they want to engage and involve audiences and communities in the work that they do.
So isn't one of the challenges that we're all dealing with that there isn't a single arts audience? That there's not only do we have multiple arts audiences who want not only just different disciplines in terms, there's people who only want to see jazz, who only want to see classical music or whatever, but we actually have this generational difference that's emerged that maybe it's happened in other times in history, but the fact that people are living longer, that they're active longer, that they're coexisting in the same space with people who are profoundly different than they are, is something that we haven't. And that sense of differentness, which is not just about race, ethnicity, but it's also about age and socioeconomic class, is I think confusing. It's just making a wonderful mess of everything, and that all bets are off in terms of who are you talking, with whom do you want to talk, are they interested in the same thing as somebody sitting next to them, or standing next to them, or in the same room with them? How do we, is it okay for everybody to have a little bit of what they want, or do we create venues in which people can only experience the work, or need only experience the work that speaks specifically to them? That was a lob to you, Mark, because that was an easy dunk.
No, I like the diversity, the mix. I personally get inspired by things I don't know anything about, or a medium I'm not that aware of, and I'm okay with that. I believe that makes an artist stronger. And just to kind of go back to what could keep institutions here, or even grow institutions, I really think the 3 films that came out Blind Spotting, Sorry to Bother You, Black Panther, but particularly the last two were so loving to Oakland, the Bay Area in general, that it makes you want to create work here. As a musician, I want to write music about the Bay Area now after seeing those films. It almost goes, wow, you don't have to do it about, these other places, New York, LA, whatnot. But we have something here, and it kind of starts with the artists, and the communities that they live in, and how they expose those communities, how they speak about those communities, and how they highlight the issues that are dealing with it. That makes me more want to work here.
Makes you want to stay here.
Well, it makes I'm definitely staying here. Makes me want to stay here. Well, I gotta have to stay here.
You have to.
Yeah, but
So stuck.
but it does inspire me to think about more the possibilities and using this as a canvas.
Well, isn't the thing, one of the things that was interesting, and I can't help going back to Blind Spotting. I just loved it. I can't help it. But one of the things that to me was intriguing about it was that it spoke to so many different audiences. That this was this sort of generation of films that are made with a different narrative structure, that are made from a different perspective, that are really trying to say something different. And you've got you probably know the demographics. I don't know who's going, but I have to imagine that you're actually putting that work in front of people who would never have seen it 10 years ago.
Maybe. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I think what David and I tried to do with that film was just be hyper-specific. We think specificity breeds sort of a universal tone, and trying to sort of widely appeal to people is just the sure way to shoot your art in the foot. So I think we just wanted to really capture as much as we could about the Bay Area in one film, and sort of the dualities and the complexities of those characters. And so, I mean, to whatever degree that people have seen it and feel that way, that's fantastic. But I also think that the thing that we got out of that film that we love so much is now we get people writing to us saying, I'm a filmmaker. I remember the first thing the producers ever asked me when I was 19 when they first approached me about writing the film. This is before I brought David in on it. And they said, have you ever thought about making a film? And I said, I've thought about it. But the gap between the thought and the reality was so phenomenally wide. What I had was relationships with the Rep, with ODC, with YBCA. I mean, the places that I performed, spaces that had provided resources for me to sort of dream within what was reachable. But I think being somebody who sort of is in and out of the Bay now, what I'm always trying to do is figure out, we made this thing over here. When we come back, how do we sort of try to amp up the scene a little bit so that the expectation or the dream in which new creators are having, that ceiling is just a little bit higher. And the expectation that I have for all the theaters here is to answer the question, to what degree are you going to cater to the expectations of your base, and to what degree are you going to curate taste for them based on what you feel like they need to see? And managing that, that balancing act is how you move the needle.
That's the magic. That's the
magic. That's the magic of curation. That's saying yes, my base will like this, but they need this. And deciding which one it is that day.
But then the other magic I'm hearing in what you're saying is it's also about feeling pride and comfort and excitement about generating culture that is of, by, and for this region. And I think that, so often there can be this sense that art, institutions or cities are like airports that the art is stopping on, and that there is not stickiness and resonance, and it's not rooted in place. And what I'm hearing, Marcus, in how you're reacting to these films, it makes me think about owning and claiming in any community. We are not trying to look to New York, to look to LA. In Santa Cruz, it's look to San Francisco. How do we be idiosyncratic to what it means to make and share and live with art here in this neighborhood, on this block, in this city, in this community? And I think about, the film that wasn't mentioned, that I think about a lot with Oakland in the last few years is Fruitvale Station, and just the extent to which the conversation could be national about that movie, and certainly was. But however, it's rooted in, and it's deeper, and it's generative here in a different way, and that's really powerful. And I think that when we're only in the import-export business of art that's going around the world, we miss the opportunity not only to cultivate our local artists, but to cultivate the deep conversations that come out of art that's very locally specific.
And I think when I get worn down by the housing issues and the money issues and all that, the thing that is the real uplift is the thing that makes this community so distinctive is that there's that voracious curiosity that I don't think exists universally across the country. And I think that there are a lot of places that are hungry, that are curious, where people are generally open. But I think the self-consciousness of the Bay Area community has been so much a source of pride based in an openness to something new. We so love our revolutionary roots. And I think that actually serves us well as artists. The audience isn't always in the same place that our artists are, but I think that there's an intentionality.
Yeah, I started out working in museums in Boston, and it's like, if you have not been there for 300 years in some way, you cannot change that label. And I think that there's a very different attitude to what it means to be bold and creative and courageous in this community. But I don't know. I mean, I think about being down in Colombia, in Medellin, or I was just in Seoul. I think that when people are confident about owning what creativity looks like idiosyncratically in their city, it's powerful in El Paso, and it's powerful in Oakland, and it's powerful in Santa Cruz. Where we suffer, I believe, is when we say, oh, what are they in that bigger city or that other place going to think, and how can we be in that import-export business of somebody else's culture instead of feeling confidence in building and pride in our own culture?
No, I'm with you on that.
Yeah, and clap for that.
Amen.
That's such a complicated identity crisis, though, right? Because on the other hand, I can't think of a more prideful place. Mm-hmm. We're so obsessed with ourselves in a beautiful way, but we are and it just so happens that we have some of the greatest sports teams in the world. Sorry, everyone else.
And in Santa Cruz,
Not
I like
football.
to say,
Not football.
I didn't wear my Raiders jersey.
In Santa Cruz, I like to say we're insecure exceptionalists. We think Santa Cruz is the best in the world, unless somebody from the Chronicle is writing, in which case we're freaked out about what they might say about how weird we are. And so I think that it's one of the great luxuries, though, of not being in New York or LA, is being able to say, how do we want to define ourselves, as opposed to how the world is going to define us.
Yeah, it's an interesting complex of incredible artistic pride and sense of self. But I always describe the Bay Area as Whoville for the Dr. Seuss fans in the world. Like if you zoom in, we're the shit. Look at all the look at all the craziness that's going on. Look at all the brilliant characters doing sort of weird and interesting things that we can pick apart for days. But we feel very unseen, and so there's a lack of validation that we have here. So people are hustling, and they're on the radio with their fifth single, and they're just like, but I'm in New York. If you have 5 singles on the radio, you've arrived.
Yeah.
And here I'm still playing the venue I played 5 years ago. Why hasn't anything shifted? Why hasn't anything changed?
Yeah.
And so this gap, this curiosity about what isn't being fulfilled starts to build the chip on the shoulder. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that we have so many artists, you see them go to LA, and the thing gets filled, and that validation happens. Yeah. And so I guess the question then presents itself, how do we begin to validate artists here in a way that feels comparable to that of other cities, that is celebrated here in the same way that it's celebrated there, so that nationally it has the same repercussions? When the degree of change from running a program at the Public Theater in New York for 2 years, and the way in which all theaters in the rest of the country went, oh, the Public.
Right, yeah.
I wonder, we should get you to do something here. It's it's the same curriculum we did here, but now the public has said that
Blessed it.
that I'm cool.
Why is that
I don't know.
validating and this isn't?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and so I like what are the validating factors here that we can get on that same
But
level?
does that come out of a fundamental insecurity that we have as a community, that we will forever think of ourselves as not Los Angeles, we will forever think of ourselves as not New York, and therefore we don't trust our own judgment?
I think if we saw a playwright do a play at a major theater here and become financially successful, and just that here, and not go to New York or anywhere else to do that, we would start to have a different self-esteem about ourselves. We would say this person's making a significant living doing something here. But I think that's rare form.
Well, and it's not just a playwright; it's also the actors and the technical, the artisans and all of that. We've got that whole mass of people who are highly skilled but can't sustain themselves in this community. Could I switch for a second? Could I just try to switch just based on some of
Sure.
the questions that
People have
our
allegedly
live
and largely
audience has
written. Yeah.
provided? Because two of them actually tie to things that I was desperate that we get to today. So we've now been 40 years since 13, and it's been 40 years since we've actually had arts in most of our public schools.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to know whether you think how that's playing out in terms of what we're experiencing now, not just in terms of artists, but in terms of audiences, in terms of philanthropy. Are you seeing dotted lines between that?
I
You'd
think,
be in a
we
position
run a lot of arts education programs, and we see very acutely the gap there. I think one negative impact is it has fueled the story that creativity is entirely intuitive, can be entirely self-generated, and is not based in support, mastery, and finding those and having those mentors and those teachers. And I think that again, especially in the Bay Area, there's a tech story about creativity. In some ways, creativity has never been a bigger sell in education, both K-12 and also when you talk about corporate and what people are looking for in the job market, But this idea that has become that creativity is solely intrinsic, as opposed to it also, you in the beginning said, for some people, there's this extrinsic expression that's key, and the ability to do that a lot, to do that with support, with good materials, with teachers, that has been very minimized and belittled, and I think we've created a false story to replace that is very insufficient. And I mean, I have a kid in kindergarten, and I remember, public school with pride saying, and it's not just about arts, right? It's also about the library, it's also about other things, but saying, and we have an art teacher who comes in once a week for 40 minutes, and saying that with pride about that opportunity in that public school, in, by the way, an affluent small town, is, it is a real problem.
Pretty damning. It's
Yeah.
pretty damning.
Yeah.
I will also say it devastated the black community in ways that affected sports and also music. I mean, I was in public school before Prop 13. I remember every kid had to learn an instrument, had a physical instrument that they learned. And there was plenty. You could learn 2 or 3,
Probably had a school band or orchestra that you played in.
And also there was equipment for baseball teams. You wonder why there's no African American, the numbers in professional baseball. Well, you go back to the late 70s when this policy was passed, and you see baseball kind of moving out of the black community, and this is a very direct reason for it. The resources that were taken out of the schools, equipment, coaches, programs, training, gone. On basketball, you need is a bucket. You don't need gloves and bats and 18 people to play. So you saw an exodus there. And that's a direct result of that. But the lack of instruments in low-income schools or even middle-income schools was dramatic. So what does a young kid do when they don't have an instrument in their hand? Well, if they still want to do music, they take on other forms that have nothing to do with an instrument. And so that then has another spiraling effect. So that's something that happens specifically to the black community from Prop 13.
I think about it in terms of how, not only how people practice, but also how they actually use art. I mean, one of the things that I think I find so troubling is that that in the same way that making art, you can do it without any training. You can do it in a satisfying way without any training. But there are people who can make extraordinary things with more skill, and that if you're never given the tools to be able to develop more skill, then not only do you lose the benefit of that, but actually the rest of us all lose the benefit of whatever you would have created. But there's also the art of being a participant, an audience, and that if you never learn that the act of if you never learn the act of how to listen, or how to look at something, to look for meaning and to look for resonance, and you never have the experience of learning that, then art's actually pretty boring if all you're doing is looking at it at face value, if a story is only a story. And I think that there's something, I feel that the quality of the listening that we hear in our theater is not the same as the quality of the listening we had years ago. And I do think it has to do with people not actually necessarily having the tools to know how to use art.
On the other hand, one thing I'm thinking as you're saying this, Susie, is I've seen a real growth because of some of these cuts in nonprofit entities, bringing artists directly into schools, and in this area, bringing more diverse artists into schools. And one of the things I'm thinking about as you're saying that is, there's a lot of damage also you can do if the way that kids experience art is we take you to an institution to see art by dead white people on the stage or on the walls, and that is what art is defined as. And I think that one thing I see that is a real treasure in the Bay Area is we have a lot of, because of the Prop 13 problems, we're short-circuiting in some ways that are not sufficient, but involve more diverse artists coming in and working with youth around more diverse mediums as well. And so something like Youth Speaks being a powerhouse is partly what a brilliant, how thrilled would I be for a middle schooler to have the access to that and maybe be able to opt out of going to visit the DeYoung if that's not for them.
Well, and being able to see somebody who looks like you.
And
doing
to
the
be
thing
able
that
to,
they love
and
doing.
when you see people who look like you, they're not in the anthropological section, they're not being objectified, they're not part of the history that no longer exists. And, we really see that one of the mandates of institutions today is how do we reformulate, disrupt, co-create within our spaces so that when kids do finally get to do that one arts field trip a year, they are going to feel empowered by it instead of feeling disempowered by it. And so while I hate seeing the disinvestment in arts in the schools, I do love seeing some of the innovative ways that artists are working directly with youth in a way that is about empowering and inviting them on a path to imagine their own creative potential, as opposed to externalizing that creative potential as something that belongs to somebody richer, whiter, or more educated than they are.
But I want to just go back to that for a second, because I agree with everything that you said, Nina. But I would also say that it is frustrating. We provide hundreds and hundreds of hours of artist-led programs in the schools.
Right. Sure.
But it is so frustrating to feel that you are a one-off, that you are not actually part of a sequential expansion of skills for somebody. So that the impact you're having is so much more minimal than it would have been had you been part of a part of a program that builds on itself. And that's where I think.
Oh yeah. I mean, look, we run at our museum a one-week program for third grade teachers to learn how to teach art in the classroom because they don't have art teachers, so it's the classroom teacher who has to do everything, and it's like, here's their 4 days where they're going to learn what they might share, totally insufficient.
Okay, let's try a different one from the audience. There's a lot of questions here about technology. Oh, what a big surprise. Here we are in the Bay Area. Yes. My favorite is technology friend or foe. But I think we're all there isn't an artist or an arts organization in the Bay Area that is, well, in the country probably, but certainly in the Bay Area where we have such a consciousness about technology where we're not touched either by the speed with which technology is changing in terms of the tools that it provides for us or the distraction that it provides for us. So before we start talking about the tech funding community, I think it just, we're in a different place in this community, I think, than in many other countries, places, at least in this country, in terms of how much we're touched by it. And you're right down practically in the middle of it down there.
Yeah, although when you drive over the hill from San Jose to Santa Cruz, the number of active Twitter users drops precipitously, you know.
In your little cabin, you don't have a whole set.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I'm a sort of the front end of that generation they took the instruments away from, and we got YouTube instead. And
look what it gave us.
No, but that's what the musical instrument was. It was permission. It was permission to be creative. It was validation in your self-expression. That's what all of the music programs were. That's what sports was. That's what the theater space was. It was a place for people to just hand it over to you and go, express yourself somehow, to figure it out. And that's what You Speaks was. That's why we spent so many years there. We referred to spoken word poetry as a gateway art form, as a gateway drug art form. Like you get a little bit of everything, and it'll lead to you'll get addicted to other.
Gateway.
But I think that's what that's what was so great. Now when I look at what happened with producers, right? It's like everybody switched over to using Reason and Pro Tools and Logic. You have 15-year-olds who can set up at Castlemont and can engineer an entire session because that became the thing that was like readily available that they could grab hold of. And I think that less speaks to like an addiction to technology and rather like the thirst that young people have to find a way to express themselves. So YouTube was phenomenally important for me, but mostly because it was just the only stage that was free at the time. So was Instagram, so was Twitter, so was whatever your medium
It sort of
is.
democratized it, didn't
It democratized it to a certain degree. Now we have to sort of, right now, in the way that those stages are set up, they feel a little sort of second-class citizen to some of the more prestigious classic mediums. But when I'll see somebody doing a skit on Instagram, and I'm like, we need to cast this person in a way that a casting director, traditional casting director, wouldn't look there because they think that's some like lower class free medium that hasn't gone through the proper channels. Suck it. What is that? But I think there's a new generation that values those things in a different way, and as they start to become the producers of things and the executive blah 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 whatever, insert whatever here, power position that can validate those mediums, they're going to become more and more powerful. And so in that way I feel like it begins to democratize the way in which that we give priority and seniority to the way in which people are expressing themselves, because now the dope new musician is somebody who just shot it in their room. And that is something to really celebrate. That wasn't available to the person who only had the iPhone that everyone has now. I remember when DSLRs came out, when that Canon camera came out, everything before that was this shoulder mount that you couldn't get a hold of. No school programs had that. The DSLR is something like every fifth kid has. Your iPhone is a 4K camera. There's no excuse now for young filmmakers who have access to that resource. You can shoot anything. We didn't have that in high school. No one was shooting that. So I have a hard time when people get into situations where they start going like, well, is technology distracting the young people? Like, shouldn't it have taken away the flutes then? Now we're playing these now.
Right, so it's totally changed and opened up production. I think it's also totally changed the opportunity for movement building around art. And when I think about a lot of artists who we work with who have not had institutional channels typically or traditionally, but they have been able to build that community and that conversation on Instagram or wherever it might be. And so then suddenly when they're showing the ways that conversation is happening around that work is not just in the gallery at the opening during that moment. And they have more control of their ability both to spark and be part of that dialogue, analog, but also they have less control and the opportunity for it to spread. And I think that people who are obsessed with control are freaked out by technology, and I think, or by what's happening with social technology now. But for people who have felt like, wow, my only place to find other artists like me, other people like me, was in these digital spaces, there's a huge amplifying platform effect. And then I also think about it from the how has it changed consumption patterns? Can people sit through a play quietly? Those kinds of things. And I feel like technology is a tool. In its best case, we're using technology as a tool to go where we want to go, to express ourselves, to connect, whatever it might be. And then we're able to make good choices about when we want to be real with each other in person, when we want to use that device, when we want to do whatever. And I think the place it becomes dangerous is when we stop feeling like it's ours to choose and that somebody else is controlling that, either by commercializing, commodifying it, or through some of the addictive wiring kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I think what we're talking about here is there's a lot of winners in terms of people who didn't have access before, who were able to make in a way without restriction than they did
Yeah.
before. There's people who can access without restriction in a way that we used to. But I do think we have to acknowledge that there have been losers. And I think about all the musicians. There's so many musicians who used to be able to make a good living in the Bay Area by performing gigs, by doing studio work, I don't know how people put together a living, but I know that they did, and that what so many musicians talk about now is the fact that they've been replaced by technology. They've been replaced by synthesized music, by music that is manufactured, and that there's and that you can access so much more without having live people in the room. And I don't know whether you among your colleagues talk about that.
Well, I, like both of these people, I believe we have to be a partner with technology. My understanding that is through my elders and through my heroes. Some of the first recordings came from black blues singers, Bessie Smith, Alberta Hunter, and Ma Rainey, and Gertrude Ma Rainey, and Louis Armstrong. Duke Ellington recorded at the Cotton Club in 1927 to 1931. That was technology because he was recorded on shortwave radio. He became probably the most famous musician at that time because if you were in England, you could hear Duke Ellington on the radio. If you were in Los Angeles, you could listen to the Cotton Club on shortwave radio and hear Duke Ellington. So these early examples showed these musicians taking part in something that at the time was seemingly democratized. And then I guess the trouble or the challenges is when things become capitalized in a way that cuts the artist out.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened to so-called jazz music,
Right.
or bebop, or hard bop, or all these different names that were controlled by record labels and record companies, but not controlled or managed by the musicians themselves. And we're seeing that creep into technology
everything,
now.
aren't we? Yeah.
And so I think we have to be a partner. Now, back to your question about musicians have to evolve like everybody else. This isn't 1970, or 1980 or 1990. Things have changed where what a musician might have been able to do to make money back then, they got to evolve. And you got to be, like any other business, diversified. Unless you're just the baddest cat out there who's going to tour all the time and get paid. Now, if you're a typical musician, then you're teaching, you're writing, you're producing, you're being involved in multi-collaborative artistic projects, not stuff that you're not interested in, all aligned with your interests and your talents. But that requires recognizing what those are and being curious about those things.
I feel like there's there's always, as artists, remembering what business you're in. And there's this sort of fantasy that you just sort of get to do your art all the time, and you build a structure for how to maintain yourself. And when that goes away, it's unfair to you.
Right.
But the reality is that you're trying to make a living doing a thing. And one of the things that technology did is it decentralized people's ability to get their work out. Now that I put stuff online, I don't need the people in my city to love my art for me to thrive. I can have this be all over the country or all over the world. And that's a different sort of lack of region specificity that we didn't have before. So there, there's that. There's also sort of this, what you were just talking about now, about like, this is sort of the first era that I can think of, and maybe I'm naive, but this is my love for the time we're in now, is that this is the first time that we are less beholden to massive institutions for direct access to our consumers. Like, I have 40,000 Instagram followers. Some people have massive followings, but if 10% of my audience buys my CD, I'm buying a house. Like that, and no middle people, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's,
Right, it's true.
there are 17-year-olds who have made an account that has 4.5 million followers.
Right.
That is a business with no in-between. The amount of market power that you have as an artist, that agency that you have, is unheard of. And so sometimes I see that gap in why it isn't being validated as a strategic effect of people who have authority and corporations who have authority, knowing that if they give this validation, then they don't need to exist.
So if I can sum this up, because we're coming to the close of our session,
And I've cursed too much.
but it was you instead of me, so I'm really grateful for that. You're welcome. I think that what you're hearing
License of a
here
poet.
is that, yes, this is a period of profound time. Yes, there's enormous challenges for artists in the Bay Area, but at the same time, I think artists are by nature optimists, and they're people who can't help looking for another way. And so I think that's what you're going to get here. Given all of that, I want to thank Raphael and Marcus and Nina for being here. I want to thank the Hewlett and the Hewlett Foundation for supporting this conversation. And we get to do the coolest thing, but I need glasses for it. I'm Susie Maddock of Berkeley Rep, and now this meeting of the Commonwealth Club is adjourned. This is the place where you're in the know. See you around.
All right.
Right. That was awesome.
That was fun.
It was wonderful.
Good stuff.
That's awesome.
Man.
Wow. Please join me in giving our amazing panel another round of applause. Thank you. So I wrote a little list of things that we learned, or maybe we learned again, as a result of that conversation. So artists struggle for validation in the Bay Area, but technology can anoint validation and also can afford us real market power in new ways. Infrastructure matters. It's the webbing that allows artists to be bold and courageous and gives them room to grow. And we're still swimming in the water of Prop 13, even if we don't feel that water around us every single day. And that we in the Bay Area are obsessed with ourselves. And that's a beautiful thing. So thank you very much for those insights. It's now my pleasure to share with you the recipients of this year's Hewlett 50 Arts Commissions. These are grants that provide $150,000 each to local nonprofit organizations to commission and develop exciting new works from world-class artists, some of whom are with us tonight. So last year, we made the first 10 of what will eventually be 50 arts commissions. Those awards were for music composition, and future years will focus on dance, traditional arts, and film and media. Tonight, we're announcing the second set of 10 awards in the genres of theater, musical theater, and spoken word. It's a special pleasure to be here tonight because these awards really are different than the kind of grant making that we typically do at the Hewlett Foundation in our performing arts program. Usually our support comes in the form of multi-year general operating support for arts organizations that make up this amazing infrastructure, many of whom were named on this stage tonight. But these artists are really for specific new works of art that come into the world and really give us something wholly new. What's really special about these awards, too, and these works is their scale. They really help organizations reaffirm their missions, but also create new and inspiring works that are new to organizations, they're new for the artists, and they're really new for audiences to experience. And what I really love about these awards is they shorten the timeline between the ideas that artists have and what we get to see on stage. So right now we're going to give you a little sneak peek into how some of these earlier projects are taking shape, and we're going to give you a sense of what the Hewlett 50 Arts Commissions are all about. This 2-minute video features a project led by the composer Wang Rao in partnership with Del Sol String Quartet called Angel Island Oratorio. It's based on poetry carved into the walls of the barracks on Angel Island in the San Francisco Bay, where many Chinese immigrants were detained there at the beginning of the 20th century.
Many of these people were kept here for weeks, months, and in their frustration and sadness, they carved these poems into the walls. Our project is called the Angel Island Oratorio, and we are using as inspiration the poems carved in the walls of the detention center here by Chinese detainees during the Chinese Exclusion Act years.
Poems are very powerful. They're not just words, but in a way I could see how they were feeling. I feel a sense of heaviness in my heart, but also very thankful to be able to have a chance to create such a meaningful project.
The amazing part of the Hewlett Grant is that it covers not just the Composers Commission, but it also allows the musicians funds to rehearse.
The world premiere now is we're planning for the fall of 2020. It will be on this very island. We're also planning concerts in the city because this is not just a local event. In a way, the message and the project itself, we hope to resonate with everyone.
We think that the story of these early immigrants is something that's universal to immigrants coming still.
So you can see why we're so excited about these awards. And without further ado, I'd like to announce the 2018 recipients. And if the representatives in the room could each stand up when I announce your award, and we'll just acknowledge you before we move on to the next one. The first is for Center for Asian American Media and Brenda Wong Aoki for J-Town, Chinatown, Our Town, about the fast disappearing histories of San Francisco's Japantown and Chinatown. Yerba Buena Center for the Arts and Rafael Casal for The Limp, exploring the constraints of male identity and its relationship to harassment, abuse, and violence. Cal Shakes and Marcus Gardley for 1,000 Ships, reimagining Shakespeare's Twelfth Night and celebrating the lives of African American women who worked in the Richmond shipyards during World War II. Destiny Arts Center and Mark Bamuthi Joseph for The Black Hole, which memorializes Oakland youth who lost their lives before the age of 30. Magic Theater and Taylor Mack for Calamity Joy, a semi-autobiographical play based on Mac's mother's cancer and death and refusal of medical treatment for faith-based reasons. Stanford Live and Wayne Mangesha for Tremonisha, which reimagines the lost opera written by the historic composer Scott Joplin, one of the few surviving pieces about the post-slavery era written by a Black person who lived through it. Teatro Visión with Salomón Santiago for Alas y Raíces, which translates to Wings and Roots and pays homage to the migration stories of people in both Mexico City and the Bay Area. The Imaginist with Arpad Schilling for The Gun, which looks at gun culture and gun violence in the United States, set against the backdrop of the tragic killing of 13-year-old Andy Lopez when a sheriff deputy mistook his toy gun for the real thing. Kitka and Carmina Silek for Baba, exploring the lives of Bernishas, women of the Balkans who assume the appearance and status of men in traditional village cultures. And finally, Policy Link with a scribe called Quest for We, the 100 Million, a spoken word performance that looks at poverty and inequity in the United States. We are so excited to see what you create. And with that, please join us in raising a glass to the awardees. The reception will take place just outside the auditorium in the lobby. Thank you.